I'm Tess. I work with the Food Shed Alliance. Most of you likely know our work, but our work supports farmers, protects the environment, and feeds people. So we do that through all of our programs. You can learn more on our website, foodshedalliance.org. We have a lot of great information there, and we are mostly grant funded, especially including the one that's funding our work tonight for these farmer trainings. This session is supported by a beginning farm and rancher development program from the National Institute of Food and Agriculture from the USDA. And we're very grateful to them for helping us host these wonderful trainings. More trainings are always, we record all of these trainings and they're always available on our website, foodshedalliance.org/farmer-training. So we're so grateful for Rachel joining us tonight. We are really excited to learn from her, and just a little bit about Rachel, and then I'll let her take it away. So Rachel DeFlumeri works as an agriculture resource specialist with the New Jersey Department of Agriculture in the Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources. In her current role, she provides technical assistance to New Jersey landowners and agriculture producers, namely in areas of regulatory, state, and local land use guidance. While in this role, she also provides her agriculture expertise to other state agencies, being heavily involved in drafting NJDEP's Natural Working Lands Strategy and Resilience Action Plan. And I'll let Rachel tell you a little bit more about herself and take it away. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you. So thank you for having me on today. I'm going to be talking about a couple different things, mainly providing the tools necessary for you to make those land use decisions and systems management guidance. So agriculture is a very complex system. And there's many different ways that each of these systems can be integrated. But it's mainly looking at what you have available on site. So what I really want to focus on a lot today is really just doing that resource mapping and inventory, looking at what sort of soils you have, what sort of physiographic provinces your land might be in, and other considerations like local zoning, and then also looking at different farming disciplines. What I find interesting too is a lot of these newer ways of farm systems management are not necessarily new by any stretch. And what I really want to look at is how we're trying to, how we want to mimic and integrate some of these natural systems to both create some resiliency within the landscape and then diversify your farming operations. And again, it's really knowing what your market has, your localized market, and then how you're going to be able to return your profit, and then what your investment costs are looking like. So without further ado, I'll get started here. Let me just share my screen. And all right. So considerations for agricultural innovation and some techniques to implement on farm conservation strategies. So this picture here, I don't know if you guys can see my screen, just let me know. Yes, no?
We can see it.
Awesome, thank you. So this picture is taken of the Delaware Water Gap right here in New Jersey. I'm actually born and raised in New Jersey, but I didn't realize how special our state is until I moved away. And I'm back, but it's just, we have such unique resources within the state, and this is actually right up on top of Jenny Jump Mountain, and you're overlooking that little valley area, and you can see the Delaware Water Gap in the distance. It's one of my favorite places to watch a sunset. So let me just get to the next. So a little bit about what I do. So I work with the New Jersey Department of Agriculture, and within the department are different divisions. I work for the Division of Agricultural and Natural Resources. We handle everything from farmland assessment, local land use compliance, animal waste management, soil sediment and erosion control planning, specifically for both commercial and agricultural development. And those being that if you have a threshold of impervious coverage and soil disturbance, you have to comply with a certain listing of standards. We also do a lot in the way of technical assistance to our producers. We're currently in the process of actually advertising and showcasing our manure link, which is basically it's basically like a listserv of manure and composting resources that are available within the area. So if you have an excessive amount of manure and you don't know what to do with it, somebody wants to put it in their garden, that listing is available online currently. Another thing that we're doing right now is it's a 319 grant. So we're working mainly within the Papacating Creek, which is up in Sussex County. And we're working to install riparian buffer and surface water surface water cleaning measures in order to kind of improve water quality within that local watershed. Other portions of our department are the Farmland Preservation Program, also known as SADC, so the State Agricultural Development Committee. They handle preservation and both permanently preserved properties as well as temporarily preserved properties. So I actually got my start with NJDA, working with them. They also help facilitate cost share. It's called a water and soil and water cost share program, which is available to farmers that are preserved and also term preserved, but that covers about 50% of your overall cost share. To integrate some conservation practices, as well as installing irrigation and tile drainage systems. Also part of our division has another cost share program, which is available to non-preserved farms. However, the funding has been defunct. So we're actually working to get some monies from the EPA, the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant monies, to start getting some funding back into that program so that monies will be available to non-preserved farms. We also help to facilitate deer fencing programs, now known as the wildlife fencing program. So providing cost share for people to install fencing in and around their properties. It has to be land in production and farmable acreage in order for that for you to qualify for that. Other areas of our department include markets. So they handle a lot of the dairy compliance. They also do the Jersey Fresh program, so marketing. And then we also work with the food and nutrition division, which is working currently on promoting food security within the urbanized populations, as well as trying to set up farmers so that farmers with urban areas so that they can actually get fresh produce in some of these food desert areas. So what we're going to be covering today. So a lot of these principles, as I had mentioned before, agriculture is a very, very broad topic, and it's both an art and a science. So I'm going to really focus on some of the strategies in providing our viewers today with some of the tools in order to be able to start to do some research and planning on their own. So one of the first things that I'm going to cover are some of the current climatic trends. Like, what are we seeing? How can we start to prepare for these changes that are going to be occurring? Another area that I'm going to be covering is planning. Planning is going to be very critical because you want to look at what your soil groups are. Where are you, and what's your region in the state? Can you improve your soil based upon your location? Because a lot of it is going to have to do with your parent bedrock material and what you currently have. I'm also going to talk a little bit about hardiness zones and climate. So that being the USDA hardiness zones. Then I'm going to touch briefly on some land cropping systems. So really focusing on soil health and soil biology. Because with that, if your soils are non-functioning, it's going to be very, very difficult to grow any crop. Especially if we're trying to minimize inputs here and reduce production costs. Another area I'm going to cover a little bit briefly is some agricultural economics. So how can we market? What things should we be thinking about when we're looking to produce something? And then another area is how can we improve and how can we move forward from here? Oh, and this is actually a picture of the South Branch of the Raritan in Morris County. It's very nice, one of my favorite fishing little spots over here. So currently what we're seeing here, one of the biggest things that I hear from a lot of our localized producers is issues with water and water management. We're either getting no water or massive inundation of water. I actually moved to Morris County in 2021, and right in September, really, when we had Hurricane Ida come through. I had never seen that amount of water in my life, as far as like how quickly the water levels rose. And then even this past January, we had some pretty severe flooding. There's been a lot of excessive amounts of water. So where we have really heavy flooding events, and then there's been times where we have no water. Those soils dry up, they're not able to infiltrate as much. And if you could see in this picture above, the very top one, this is primarily ash tree. So I think the changes in the amount of the pests that we're getting here is also causing a decline in naturally occurring vegetation. So that's also, I think, having an effect on the amount of water that's able to inundate into the soil. So we're seeing more of these flooding events, not to mention tons and tons of water at one time. We're also seeing major temperature fluctuations. Really in the past 3 years. It's not that it's been super cold for an extended period of time. We're getting very cold weather, and then warm weather, and then cold weather. So those fluctuations have an effect on what we're on the ability for plants to be able to sustain themselves and retain cold hardiness. We'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. We're seeing more frequent and intense weather events, very crazy wind blasts and microbursts. And then that's also, I think, going to be that because we're seeing those changes in climatic conditions. I think I'm seeing a lot less in the way of pollinator insects and those resources that are available to pollinate our fruit crops. And we're also seeing these shifts in growing degree days too, because of those temperature fluctuations. So I'll cover this a little bit more in the next slide. And then also chilling hour requirements. So onto the. So the USDA just published, I believe it was just this past year, the shift in our hardiness zones. So I live north central-ish. So what used to be a 6B has now become a 7A. So we're seeing warmer temperatures in these areas. We're also seeing changes in chilling hour requirements. So chilling hours are very important for perennial cropping systems, namely fruit crops, apples, peaches, pears. They require a certain number of hours of temperatures under 35 degrees in order for them to facilitate development, fruit set, and also disease resistance. So for instance, we're already seeing issues in Maine where like in cranberry crops, they require at a minimum 1,500 hours of chilling hours. And if they see a decline in those amount of chilling hours, they're seeing an issue in fruit development where they're getting deformed fruit, they're getting less yields. And they're also seeing that in blueberry crops because blueberries also require, I believe it's up to 1,200 chilling hours in order for them to have complete fruit set. And just so that I kind of briefly touch on this too. So chilling hours are very important for development and maturation and reproduction within perennial crops. When you have temperatures and it's basically like a clock that sets. When the temperatures start to dip below about 50 degrees, 40 degrees, the plants will start to acclimatize. And what that does is they'll have a hormonal response to where it slows all their growth. And then they also start to store carbohydrates and sugars within the cells so that if a freeze event occurs, those cells are not going to burst. So when we have, 2 weeks of 40 degrees and below, really the threshold is like 32 when those 32 to 40 degrees or Fahrenheit, they're starting to accumulate an hour over a period of time. Let's say it's within a 24-hour period, and then you get a jump to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, that clock actually ends up resetting. So with these temperature fluctuations that we're getting, it's actually causing an issue for a lot of these plants. They're not able to survive a lot of the winter, and then it's having an effect during the growing season where you're getting deformed fruit and less production. Another area that we're kind of seeing trends and change with are growing degree days. So a growing degree day is also a way to monitor both plant and insect development. So this, if you go online, you could actually, you would be able to track when, this is actually a good graph below here. It tracks for you when you're expecting these changes to occur as far as growth stages and development within both plants and crops. It's also very helpful for determining when you should be applying certain plant protection measures, as well as when you're going to be seeing certain insects and disease that are prevalent that you need to watch for. And I always like to go with having an understanding of all these interacting parts. Kind of gives you, I have the disease triangle here. It gives you a good idea about what sort of plants that you should be looking at. So really your management strategy should really be looking at all. That's why I say with agriculture, it's an art and it is a science, because it's really dependent upon what you're seeing, it's observation, and then it's also what you've learned previously. So keeping good records is very integral. Another really great resource for tracking a lot of this stuff is Rutgers Cooperative Extension Plant and Pest Advisory. So they're tracking growing degree days for certain pests and insects and diseases. They also have specifically updates for livestock, and they have updates for tree crops. I try to use as much of the local information as possible, specifically when making and determining those decisions on when to be applying certain pest protections. I prefer to use organic methodology, but it's sometimes you really, especially with fruit crops, you have to, apples in particular, you really have to be on your spray schedule. Otherwise, if you miss a date or a window, you're going to be suffering, and sometimes even for the following seasons as well. Any questions so far? I don't want to skip anybody. No? Okay. So I'm going to get into a little planning and research. I'll get into these links a little bit later on. I have the USDA Web Soil Survey. It's a really great resource for determining what sort of land value, land resources that you have, specifically looking at different soil types, crop productivity measures. But it's a survey, so it's not exact, but it gives you a really great idea about what your soil types are at a localized level. And again, it's a survey, so it's very important that you are taking the time and looking at your own land, because there's a lot that you can tell by even what sort of plants are physically growing within an area. For instance, if you have a pasture and it's almost all dandelion. Generally, if you're looking at the soil, and you're looking at those plants that are actually the vast majority of the population, specifically dandelion, my head goes to, oh, maybe I have a calcium deficiency. Maybe I have an issue with compaction. So, well, there are a lot of different clues that you can use to kind of target in, but utilizing this resource to give you like kind of like a baseline understanding of what's currently present really helps you to understand and make those determinations. Another really great resource, and I'll get into some of the planning aspect a little bit later on too, after the slide, is NJGeoWeb. This is NJDEP's resource. So I look at this for do we have wetlands within this area? Are there any streams, specifically category 1 stream corridors? Because there are certain state level restrictions as far as your ability to be able to even cultivate land if it's within a wetland area, or if you're looking to put up like a ag structure of sorts, say a pole barn, or you want to put a high tunnel in. there are restrictions and distances in which that you have to be aware of before you actually try to develop some of these areas. And those are known also as buffer areas. So a category 1 stream will have a 350-foot buffer area. I can get a little bit more specific when we look at a map a little bit later on. Another great resource I have here is NJ Map 2. So this helps you to see if the land is actually preserved. It gives you block and lot information. And it also looks into, like, is it in the highlands or pinelands region? So it kind of gives you a better idea. This resource, NJ Map 2, also has topographic maps available. I think it's very important to understand what your naturally occurring slope looks like on the land that you're using. Another great resource is historic aerials. I find that it's very helpful to understand what historical land use has occurred prior to. Was this area previously farmed? Was it forested? So that's going to give you a really great idea about what's going on and what to expect. And then other resources too, specifically with dealing with woodlands, is the FIA data. So we have state-specific data where they do, I believe it's every 3 years, we have over 6,000 plots in New Jersey that they monitor to see what the common vegetation is and some of those trends and forest successional development. So all these tools here will help you to understand what your planning and business goals can be. How much do you want to invest in changing the soil? And then it also kind of gives you that block and lot information. So another really important area to understand before you kind of develop any sort of business endeavor is, like, what are you allowed to do on this? So New Jersey, Garden State, you can see the plows here. That's why I put the seal in. I think it's interesting. We came from agriculture. And if you go anywhere outside of the US, people don't understand. They always ask what exit are you off of? But we still have a lot. We have over 2 million acres of forested land, and a lot of agricultural land still kind of within production. So New Jersey is a town rules state. So what that means is every municipality has its own governing structure. So they can determine what their zoning regulations are. And that oftentimes will trump state authority, minus DEP's regulations on wetlands and environmental resources. So it's really important, if you're moving to a new town, where is my property located? What zone am I going to be living in? Because sometimes there are certain zones that don't permit agricultural uses. There are some zones that do permit agricultural uses, but sometimes they won't allow a rooster or something along those lines. And it also gives you an idea about building setbacks. Where can I put, if I want to put a high tunnel structure in or build a greenhouse, how far away do I have to be from the sides of the property? How tall can it be? So these things are very important, especially when making these investments into your property. And as I had mentioned a little bit before, NJDEP has a whole slew of regulations, which they are in the process of updating that. Well, they are proposed now. So they're going to be, the comment period is, I think, another 80 days, but they're redoing wetlands, their wetland regs, their flood hazard regulations. And these are very important for understanding where your buffers are, what sort of exemptions exist. So they have oftentimes agricultural use exemptions, which would allow you, for instance, I'll use wetlands as one of those. So if you were to look on an aerial, I have to provide a specific example, and always feel free to reach out to me directly. If a wetland has been within agricultural production and since the enactment of the rule, so 1985, I believe, and if it's continually in production, but it is considered as a wetland, you can maintain production on that. If you cease to keep it in production for, I believe it's 5 years, then it will revert back to a wetland, and you cannot go and cultivate it again. So these things are very important to consider, specifically because there are state penalties for going against this act. I also like to look into, are there any existing deed restrictions on the property? Is there an easement in place? Because oftentimes too, there might be information on that deed that restricts any sort of other development, or is under a different ownership. So these things are very important to consider. And then you also have your highlands and pinelands regulations. So that they put limits on the amount of impervious coverage that you're allowed to have on a lot. And depending upon, I know the highlands more intimately, you have the planning and preservation area. But all these are targeted, both highlands and pinelands are targeted at water protection. So they put limits on impervious coverage and disturbance. And within the highlands specifically, you have your planning and preservation area being more restrictive on what sort of developments that you're able to do. And oftentimes you do some, if you're other than agricultural development, you would need to get certain approvals from the Highlands Council. Same thing with the Pinelands too. They have to actually weigh in on any sort of development project that you're going to be doing. Agricultural development included. They also look at water usage and consumptive use. So digging into soils here. So the soil is very important to understand because that's going to help you to determine your management goals and what you want to invest in. Say, for instance, I want to put blueberries in, but I live in a very a loamy clay soil. Is that going to make, it's not going to necessarily make sense to put that crop in, because if it doesn't drain well, if your soils are too alkaline, that's also going to cause a lot of issues too with the crop. And then, so it's really looking at like, what do you have and how much can you invest in it? And then I'm going to talk a little bit about ways to improve your soil structures naturally. And what I really want to get focused on is really farming should be a systems management. So it's not just looking at the soil and then I'm going to throw, if it's too alkaline for the crops that I want to grow, I'm going to throw sulfur down. Well, that might work for a little while, but how often are you having to amend? Another component of that is your organic matter content. How much is too much? And really, natural solutions are some of the better of the two. I mean, of any solution. Specifically working with living roots, I've seen drastic improvements on soils when incorporating even like wood chips and like comfrey and other plants that are going to provide what is called like a green manure, that are creating a living interaction between your soil organisms and then the above ground plant matter. So soil health is tossed around a lot, but what is it in reality? What I think of is the Soil Food Web does a good job at illustrating some of this, but there is a very complex interaction, a lot of which we don't even fully understand, specifically with our microorganisms that are in play. But it's an exchange. It's the plants are receiving sunlight, they're growing, they're decomposing, and they're feeding the organisms. And then what we try to do as far as a agricultural system is we try to manage that. But when you're starting to add some synthetic inputs, it oftentimes can change the nature of the soil and then also disregard some of the microorganisms that are working to facilitate that balance. So I really like to think about biological components of the soil, fungi for mycelium and mycorrhizal fungi, which create that exchange between plant and soil. We're looking at protozoa and our soil detrivores that are breaking that organic material down and making it available to plants. What exists right outside the roots is what they call the rhizosphere, but that's where most of our action is going. It's really within inches of the root, and that's really where all that life is going on. There's a constant circulation of both carbon and amino acids that are being circulated between plant and the soil organisms. And then those physical components I touched a little bit on. Hey, I have really clay soil, but I want to put a blueberry crop in. Does that actually make sense to do? So there are simple methodologies for testing physical components other than having to send it in for a soil sample. I don't have an illustration of it here, but you could take a mason jar, fill it up with the soil, a composite sampling of the soil within your area, and throw some water in, shake it up, and then wait for that soil to settle. And that'll actually give you the components of your sand, silt, clays, and gravel layers and rocks. So the organic matter is going to settle last, or it'll be organic matter will kind of stay suspended in the on the surface. Your clays are going to be on top, your silt's going to be below that, and then your sandy and heavier particles are going to settle first. So that kind of gives you a good depiction of what your soil texture is. And then I like to look at different methodologies of soil testing. So a lot of our extension services, they'll use a Melick 3 extraction methodology. This is a good method, but it's not what is naturally occurring within your soils. I've been looking more into the Haney extraction methodology. They use a water extraction, and they also do soil respiration analysis. So they're looking at what is actually plant available. So with the Melick 3 extraction, they're using a chemical extraction, an acid extraction to pull the nutrients from the soil sample that you provided them. Whereas with the Haney, they're actually using what would actually occur within nature. So water extraction, so something that's already going to be within that organic pool and plant available. Another way that you can also look at your nutrient analysis is doing leaf petiole analysis. That would actually tell you what your plants are actually uptaking in the field, and that's done that can be done during the growing season. And why should you care? There are a lot of reasons for that, but mainly because if you're applying something that you don't necessarily need, it's a waste of investment. And plants are opportunists. They're going to use, if you're applying a ton of nitrogen, they're going to use that nitrogen. Specifically with perennial plants and fruiting crops, you want to be careful about how much nitrogen you're applying. I think it's very important to have an understanding of what's going on within your soil, so you know, and you can observe what's going to be occurring the next year, and you can start to plan and also budget how much input costs you're putting into it. This is another methodology here, keyline farming, which I can talk a little bit about later on. But that's more of a water management strategy as well. So climate smart agricultural types and strategies. This is a term that's used a lot. I think it makes sense to use the whole system. So NRCS is using a lot of this terminology. NRCS being Natural Resource Conservation Service. And oftentimes they'll provide a higher ranking for those applicants that are applying for their programs if they want to implement some of these, I'll call them CSAs. But something to keep in mind with NRCS, specifically when applying, you don't want to talk about production. You want to say, I have a resource concern, but think about how you're going to word that to say that it's a resource concern. For instance, if I want to put a couple buffers or a grass waterway in, you don't want to talk about how your land is being eroded and it's keeping your crop from growing and you're not getting great yields. You want to talk about losing soil. I have a lot of erosion occurring on my fields. So how can I remedy that? So those are some things to keep in mind when discussing that with NRCS, because their primary focus, especially with their establishment being after the Dust Bowl, is really those resource concerns, controlling erosion, improving water quality, and improving wildlife and biodiversity. So having your production reasoning back here, try to put that into a resource concern. Matt, go ahead.
Is climate smart a thing? What I mean is it just a casual term, or is it a real initiative, formal initiative, kind of like I believe EQIP and a few other environmental programs that are in the Farm Bill? That's
a great question. So it's not a program like EQIP or CSP or RCPP, but it is a slew of recommended practices. So it's called a CSAF listing. So it's their climate smart agriculture and forestry practice list. So it's basically a way for them to say that this is providing a mitigation value And they're actually able to, with this listing, also provide data for what sort of values that it's providing on that mitigation front. So these are specific practices, not a program, but they are specifically with applying for RCPP. They're really looking for those practices to be kind of pushed more so than the other practices. So did that answer?
Mostly, yes, thank you.
Yeah, and feel free to ask any other questions, because it's, as I'm learning, because I'm still learning about NRCS, I'm going to be constantly learning about NRCS, but they are also updating their, I'll call it a CSAF listing for the fiscal year of 25. And the thing with NRCS is their practices change pretty consistently, depending upon which programs are effective. And then they also have some of these intermittent practices that aren't necessarily like their standard, but like soil carbon amendment was one of them about a year and a half ago with applying biochar. So they change a lot, and their cost share values change dependent upon what their constituents say, and then because they're New Jersey specifically is part of the Midwestern region, so New York, Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey all have to kind of vote on a listing of standards.
Does the agriculture have a climate smart program that you're involved in, or that's pretty much the other agency that you just mentioned?
NJDA,
Yeah.
So we're actually incorporating these practices within our what I kind of briefly covered before, our conservation cost share program, which we're trying to get money into currently. We just applied for an EPA grant this past March to try to get that funding in, but those would have a listing of climate smart practices that are eligible for cost share.
That would be through DOA if you're successful.
NJDA, yep. Lord willing, we will be, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And let's see. So I'm going to talk a little bit about farming systems and perennial cropping systems. So some of these considerations that could be integrated into a system. I think really in looking at a system, if you're trying to control your inputs, I think both livestock, animals, and woodlands should all be considered within that system, and trying to make it to where it mimics what's occurring in your naturalized system. So we don't really have the climate for figs up north, so it's going to be very difficult and cost intensive to do a full-on fig operation if I wanted to do that, unless I wanted to build some infrastructure in place. So just like kind of thinking about these systems and how choosing specific crops that are going to be better suited for the soils in the region, and then looking at integrating animals because of their manure value, and then also some of the pest and disease control that they provide. And actually, if I can go back to this slide here, the bottom picture below is a hazelnut orchard with wider alleys. What their intention of doing is this was actually established by I'll say a nonprofit called Trees for Grazers. They're doing a lot of cool work, and they also have some excellent resource information. I have that further on down the line. But what they did was they installed a hazelnut orchard, and they made the rows wide enough to where it would allow them to put in electric fencing and then to graze in between. So a lot of this grazing, especially with any of the nuts that are not actually harvested, the animals will be able to have access to that. And then it also, it allows for well, not free, but it allows to mow in between these alleyways. So a lot of weed control and pest control. I was also up at a Food Shed Alliance event in, I guess that was in May. But the Ironbound Cidery and how they space their rows, they're actually using chickens to graze in between those cider apple rows. And what was interesting was they said that whole hill was just covered in mugwort multiflora rose, autumn olive. And you could see that the forage value was much better actually after a few years of integrating some of these animals, and obviously I'm sure they did some weed control and utilizing wood chips in between these rows too to control some of the weeds between the trees. But the types of forages that were actually growing there, as opposed to seeing predominantly mugwort, it was amazing to see that difference and change. And then also you're allowing, you're using that manure, that can be a very, valuable, fertilizer for your plants. So. And then I also want to just kind of pinpoint this as well too. So I had mentioned apples before. It's very important, specifically your table apples. They're very needy, especially those high sugar varieties. You're going to have a lot of pests and diseases, so you really need to have a solid spray schedule in place. Otherwise, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle all the time. So I like to try to focus on in areas that's where practical, plants that are going to have a little bit less care needs. So, and I'll show that listing a little bit later on. And like I said, integrating livestock animals are I think very important to it functioning as a system. This way you're inputting you're putting less inputs, exporting less inputs into your farm production system. And then woodlands too, they provide a huge value. See, a lot of farm woodlands that I see are not being managed. And even those that are farmland assessed woodlands, so those being under like a woodland management plan or a forest stewardship plan, public and private land, it's very specifically even public land. A lot of these lands are not necessarily being managed very well. It's costly, specifically even with farm woodlands too, because if all your production costs are going into supplying a crop that's going to be provided to a consumer, care of your woodlands is going to be not as important. And I would really, and it's my hope for our state here, so that we start to kind of integrate woodland management into our farming systems, in that they provide a valuable resource for our pollinator insects, they provide buffers, and they also help to control soil erosion. And it's a better integrated system. So some of the types of agroforestry practices that we're applying currently for our division is applying for an RCPP grant this coming fiscal year. We're looking at doing some of these agroforestry practices. Something that's pretty exciting to me is some of these silvopastoral systems. Like I said, integrating your grazing animals in with either a fruit or a nut producing crop. Riparian forest buffers. I live right along the south branch of the Raritan. So in seeing all this ash dieback, extensive amount invasives that are starting to rip down a lot of sycamores and other trees that are actually holding in place. I think overall it would benefit a system, even if you have a small stream that's running through your property. It'll help to control the erosion, because water moves and it'll take a lot of that soil and it can take a lot of land out of production. Another technique is called alley cropping. So it's using large tree crop and larger alleyways to produce, like say for instance, you want to do black walnuts alleyway. Well, let's not use black walnuts because that's juggalo, but let's say northern pecan, and you could do pumpkins in between to cultivate, as long as it allows for enough space and sunlight to penetrate through that canopy. There's also forest farming techniques in some of these like degraded woodland areas, where you could start to incorporate perennial medicinals into these systems. And then windbreaks. Windbreaks are really important. They help to, especially if you're a larger orchard and you are spraying, it helps to control the drift that's going on to another piece of property, helps to control dust, so you're not getting as many dust complaints. And then also, if you have a pig farm, we hear this pretty often as well, like with the smells, it'll help to control some of the smells and keeping it on your property. So in deciding on some of the systems that you want to be integrating, I think it's if you can, try to integrate as many of these production types as possible, but also keeping in mind what's your consumer base. Because I think a lot of what we of integrating some of these different practices into more of a commercial space, I think it's really important that we look at our consumer base within the area. How can we get produce or what you're cultivating to the local consumer? What would make it, because everybody likes convenience, so what would make that more viable for that local marketplace? Lancaster Co-op is that delivered, because I think we're going to be headed towards more of a delivery type service, because a lot of the farmers markets, it's difficult to get to for a lot of people. A lot of people buy their stuff online. So really trying to build those local relationships, and then determine what, if you're growing, why are you growing what you're growing, so that you can sell it to the local consumer. Another thing too, specifically even with hazelnuts, is some of these crops they require a lot of labor. So how can we minimize the amount of time that we're spending in the field so that it's still financially viable to produce these crops, specifically hazelnuts, like with harvesting equipment, and even I think of hops. So integrating other producers that are within your region to try to share equipment. And then even looking at the value added market, specifically with if you're doing a riparian forest buffer, and you know somebody that does basket weaving or is looking for smaller willow stakes, meeting that person so that you can get that product to the value added production phase and then out to the consumer. So really kind of facilitating and making those connections. Like I said, it's very broad, but I think it's very important to understand that it's so important to understand your market before, and what your local region is, before you're ultimately making a decision on what sort of systems that you want to be integrating. A lot of these tree stocks, thinking about propagating your own material even to sell, and then being creative. I think it's really important to kind of integrate all these things, but how is it going to work on your ability to manage it? How much time do you want to invest in it? Specifically, even with rotational grazing, that's one of the pictures that I had here. That's extremely management intensive. So if you have 1 or 2 to 3 head of cattle, it might be a little bit easier. You have to think about their access to water. How often are you rotating? What's your forage production value looking like? So what the level of management intensity should also dictate the decision that you're going to be making on the systems that you're integrating. And some newer research is being done within perennial grain crops. I think there's also a lot of benefit to integrating some of these cover crops into production. So for instance, utilizing instead of just cultivating into a cover crop, because you're going to be having to buy seed every single year, using livestock animals to graze these materials so that you're spending less money on feed. The Land Institute has been breeding perennial grain crops. Kernza is their trademark one currently, and it's a wheatgrass variety. The yields are not like they are with regular winter wheats that we see here in our state, but they are in some areas commercially available. So looking at these as a possible solution to our cover crop, because I see most of the cover crops that I see in the state are perennial rye. And then it's also difficult to access different types of cover crops as well. They might not be available. Certain tree crops, some that are a little bit different. Hazelnuts, Rutgers has some really great varieties that they develops, and actually they're being nationally recognized. A lot of our hazelnuts that Rutgers has developed are being utilized in Michigan, and that market is just starting to really develop. Another thing, better than table apples, cider apples. That's another market that's already, the hard cider industry is starting to really be bolstered. Aronia berries are more of a medicinal crop. They don't taste great, just fresh fruit. but there's ways to make jams and things of that nature. Blackcurrant, pawpaws. So I was very interested in doing, I have pawpaws myself, but it was more interesting to me because I was in the research that I had done. They were saying that 2 to 3 years you'll get a fruit crop, and that's not necessarily true. The difficult part about pawpaws is they cannot be propagated via cuttings. They have to be propagated from seed. But really cool crop. And then you also have to have more than one variety in order to pollinate itself too. So those flowers kind of emerge a little bit earlier. They're fly pollinated. Really interesting crop, and also excellent too, because you don't have to worry about pruning. Once they get established, they don't need very much in the way of fertilizer. They were able to withstand drought. So it's just finding the market for that, because they perish pretty rapidly. Service berries are another interesting crop as well. They get cedar apple rust, but they do have delicious berries. Elderberries, that's also becoming something that's very popular medicinally, and also for jams. I actually personally prefer utilizing the flowers to make like a simple syrup. Persimmons, relatively easy to grow, native to here, and then northern pecan. So some of the programs that are providing information and guidance to people, and then in some instances even some cost share values, are Trees for Grazers. I had mentioned them before. They're doing a lot of really great work. Their primary focus is on silvopastoral systems. PASA is another really great organization. They have great information on cover crop and organic cultivation methods. SARE, another really awesome resource. They provide grant funding to do even farmer-led research. I had mentioned Natural Resource Conservation Service. Their primary programs are EQIP and CSP, so conservation, what was it? Conservation, I don't remember right now, sorry. But the CSP program is an enhancement base, so it's taking EQIP up to another level. So this is for the producer that's already doing a lot of this conservation work, but wants to kind of bolster what they're already doing. Propagate is another agroforestry initiative. They have grant funding currently, I believe. Don't recall who is their main funder, but they have the ability to actually do consulting work in New Jersey and map. Say, for instance, you want to have, say, 20 acres in northern pecan, and not just a monoculture, but they'll help you to do some general mapping and some decision, and they'll provide you with some decision-making tools. Then we have North Jersey RC&D. They're doing a lot of great work with grazing. The Rodale Institute, also really great research site. And then I learned a lot of microbiology, with practical microbiology with Dr. Elaine Ingram's Soil Food Web. They do a lot of great webinars. Gabe Brown's Regenerative Agriculture, his story is pretty unique, especially because he was one of the first really within the Midwest to start really pushing for conventional farmers to start to integrate some of these regenerative techniques. And then NOFA NJ. And that's it. That's my dog.
Amazing. Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, you're welcome. Sorry, I was speaking a little fast, but I hope covered what you were looking for. And I could even get in if you guys have any questions too, or want to see some of the mapping tools that I was mentioning before. That's how a lot of how I make a lot of decisions, and it's helpful.
Yeah, actually, would you mind going back to that slide really quick? I would love to look at that. It was the USDA survey. right?
We'll do, yeah, because this can be kind of tricky to navigate.
Well, if we can't get to it right now, maybe would you share your presentation with me and then I can share it with the participants after this as well? Oh, there we go.
Sometimes it takes a little while to load. And let's see. Import AO. Oops. Let's do it. We'll use my. Let's just say this. So you're able to, let's say, use the hand. So you see this little taskbar up here?
Mm-hmm.
So you really want to start with AOI, your area of interest. You can import your address. Use a little hand to swivel over to where you want to go. And let's look at this field here. So then you go to your AOI. I like to use this little triangular shape one because you have more flexibility with the type of shape that you want to create. Say we're down there. Is this it? So you have your field of interest. Go to your soil map. Yes, Matt.
I'll wait till she's done.
I'm just curious about this. This is cool. Please, Matt, go ahead.
Well, I'm reluctant because I would want to ask about something in a different direction than a lot of what Rachel has talked about so far.
No, shoot. Go ahead.
Sure, okay. I could appreciate how this would be incredibly valuable for a new farmer. But I'm coming at this from a different direction. I see climate change as, one of the urgent problems of our time, and I think New Jersey state government does too. But I guess I want to know, is Department of Agriculture in? Should farmers be in? I'm not getting a sense of that connection.
How do you mean?
Between that we have this very difficult problem and we need all the help we can get. So I guess I'm wondering, are farmers, do they see this? Are they accepting it? Do they want to be part of the solution? Above and beyond, the kind of very useful techniques that you're talking about here. And because there's things you haven't talked about that they can conceivably do if indeed they see, the urgency.
So how do you mean in all the way? Because I wasn't sure who was going to be on today. But
Well, I might be the only person with this interest for all I know.
no, you're not. I hear this a lot. And honestly, like we're in a very difficult financial situation as well. I'm not talking about NJDA, but I'm talking about I'm talking about producers as a whole. Like the entire system would have to ultimately shift. So what's economically feasible is kind of the way I'm trying to address it. It's making these smaller decisions and tweaks and paying attention to your soil chemistry, paying attention to the biology, because without physically and functioning soil biology, we're not doing any carbon sequestration. So that's something that I think is the most integral, because a lot of this, in order to fully implement a lot of these conservation things, it has to make economic sense.
Right, yeah. If I can build on what you're saying, Rachel, like it's hard I think a lot of farmers nobody gets in the business of farming to say, I'm gonna, use a bunch of chemicals and destroy my soil. Like people just want to grow food and feed their families and feed their communities. And I think like a lot of people who are in the business now were probably handed a situation that is maybe now that we have science to back it, maybe not jiving with like how we want to move forward to mitigate climate change and put in these conservation efforts. And I think, Rachel, what you're saying is really potent as far as like, you can't change that entire business model that a lot of farmers are working with without understanding the soil biology a little bit and really respecting where all that is. So this is really foundational for farmers to be able to make that transition. Because I think at the end of the day, you know, it's not all about money, but in order for people to be able to make these changes, they have to have a little bit of a buffer zone. And I think there are a lot of programs like NJDA and NRCS that are providing some funding buffers for people to make those transitions.
Yeah, funding and technical assistance, because a lot of this stuff too
Exactly, yeah.
it's new. Like for instance, if I want to do, I'm gonna say reduce till because I gotta be careful of my audience, but I don't think you can organically do no-till, like from a commercial scaling standpoint. But say for instance, you want to get involved with doing a reduced till system. There's a lot of things that would need to happen before then. The equipment, what your seeding depth rate is. There's a lot of considerations throughout the year. How are you actually maintaining the weed management? What's your plant spacing at? What current equipment do you have? So there's like so many different financial decisions that I would be nervous in making those transitions and investments, because it's not necessarily going to pan out. You don't know if it will pan out and what the market is. And so it's both financially, but really I see a lot of these solutions being having an economic benefit. And if you could push it that way to the conventional farmer, to the person that's not necessarily thinking in this context of climate farming, then they'd be more likely to adopt it.
Right. Right. What my colleague Eric Derby always says, I don't care how they came to the party as long as they stay, when talking about this type of farming. So it's, if that's how we can get people to be thinking about it, I think that's beneficial. And also to back up to your other question that you mentioned before, Matt, I wanted to jump in and say, in the last couple years, even in the last year, I feel like I've seen a change in the way I'm in the way that like NRCS and a lot of government agencies, even USDA as a national entity, changing the way that they are speaking about climate smart farming and really promoting more regenerative tactics and providing that type of funding. So I think like just driving that home with all of these resources that you're talking about today, Rachel, is really important, because even when these entities start to change their overall language about it, that boots on the ground technical assistance and expertise is really what's going to make the difference for people to actually stay with those conservation practices.
And it's sometimes too, a lot of farmers need some handholding. So, and that's not, I would, you know, if I rent a house right now and I do work for people on the side, like if I had my own farm, it's very daunting. And especially if it's been in your family for so long and you're trying to honor what your father taught you and what you're learning. So there's there's a cultural paradigm as well. That's why I say farming is not just a science. It is absolutely also an art form. And you're learning a lot too. You could do, like I was mentioning the pawpaws before, like I could do all the research and figure it out, whatever, but that's not necessarily how it works in the real world. I learned that after college. I went to school for agriculture. Like plants don't read the book is what one of my professors would always say. True.
That's awesome. Yeah, for real. It's a lot of, you know, we can do all of this. It's there's a point where it's easy for us to sit back and like say how important it is to really move towards climate smart farming. And then there's the putting it into practice and getting larger swaths of land to really transfer practices. And I think I do see the shift happening.
I do too.
I really do. It's maybe not happening as fast as we all might want it to, but it is happening. And I think it's one of those things that will start to snowball.
Great.
You know, and I think like things like what we've been talking about today with what you've shared with us are really important for that snowball effect to really take place.
And it's also communicating with your farmers. Farmers love to talk. And if they see somebody that is successful in their area that is starting to integrate some of these things, because that's what we're really pushing for. I mean, we're really pushing that for even with the 319 stuff, even like putting up exclusionary fencing, putting in riparian buffers up within this Papacating watershed area. It's people talk. And once they see like, oh, okay, they, after a season or two, okay, they seem to be doing really well. And even though it was like a crazy idea, they'll most likely, it just takes time for a lot of the stuff. And I'm seeing a lot of like these, like you said, Tess, like smaller incremental changes, and it's becoming more acceptable. Yeah, so
Totally. Yeah, we have this regenerative grains initiative that we're working on. And we have had success in suggesting to people that, you know, if you have a 50-acre farm, try 5 acres in this new different way of growing and give it a couple of years. And if you see a change that you like in the next couple of years, maybe try next year, then try 10 acres, then, they keep expanding that. But of course, it comes back down to those financials, people can't take that financial risk to convert their entire farm to a different way.
Yeah, you have a market that they're, are you working by chance with, Ruthie Peretti with the?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm really glad because the town gave a lot of pushback with that mill. That's huge
Oh,
too.
gosh.
Like having somewhere to send your grain, because most of the farmers are guaranteed that they have a place to sell their corn and their soybean. Generally it's off seas. But so that's really neat. Cool.
Yeah, that's really great. I know I loved in your presentation when you were talking about knowing your markets before you are even planting anything. Because that's huge too. And like when I was farming, I was just like, all right, I'm gonna grow what I grow and see who buys it, and then I was always left over with 100 bushels of eggplant because people were buying it. So knowing that, like knowing what you're selling and to who, and like what's needed in your community, and those producer like cooperatives and things like that, I feel like are also making a resurgence, and places like Marksboro Mills and other producer coordinated cooperatives are so important too.
Yeah, especially with equipment costs. And then if you're changing what you're planting, especially with a lot of our agronomic crops, you're gonna have to change your equipment. There's different seeding equipment for oil seed than there is from, you're doing a bean crop, like. So there's learning curves that are with that as well.
Totally.
Gonna have another one, or
Yeah, go ahead.
exhausted? I want to.
I'm really tired.
Let me see if why don't you see if somebody else wants to say something, because I can go on forever.
You got the floor.
Okay. I totally understand what you're saying, and I've watched over the decades, many sectors have gone through the same journey where they start on, what makes economic sense, and it's certainly a great way to start. But at least in certain sectors, you also see visionaries who kind of have a better sense of, what are we dealing with and what are we going to deal with in the future? Because things are changing, as you said in the first part of your presentation.
Yes,
if you
they
just remain focused on your farm 100%, I don't think that's going to be enough to see what's coming, both for yourself and to try to help up the greater society. And if you do, though, then I think you could see certain other opportunities and then translate that into the economics. for instance, if you could lobby in the new farm bill for farmers to have incentives to support sequestration and the R&D and the monitoring to make sure that it works, or agrivoltaics, things that might have economic sense, or sustainable forms of biofuel. So, again, if you have at least some sense of where this is all going, and it's not going in a good place, and we're all part of it, and I think we all have a role to play, and then work in the economics as opposed to just starting and staying there. Anyway, that's my theory of change.
I can appreciate that. I think something too, though, it's like, for instance, well, I wanted to touch actually on this before I forget it. The way, and this is kind of my personal hat on, I would really like to see the way these grant programs make payments change a little bit. Like, for an equip contract, it's reimbursement based. So a lot of this is you're having to pay the upfront cost in order to do the installation of these practices, and then it's not going to cover the whole cost of it either. And sometimes it's anywhere between like 40 to 75% of the cost is covered, and then so you're taking a huge leap of faith in order to and it's a huge financial risk. So I think, that being said, I would like to see more of like an incentive cost payment and then reimbursement, because I don't think there's no such thing as free money. So I would like to see something along those lines, like a slight program shift in how these cost share payments are actually allocated to our producers. And I think we would get even more of a shift in some of these, in incorporating some of these practices. But that being said too, like with a biofuels thing, you have to be able to know where are you selling that biofuel? Where is it going to be used? Who can refine it? There is a lot of economics that goes into making these adjustments. Like, we're fully almost petroleum based. I mean, if you look at both pharmaceutical to agricultural use, it's where our economy is petroleum. So then making those shifts, like, how do we other than making these small incremental changes and making it economically viable for these people to start to adopt this, and saying, hey, we need this, let's say switchgrass to make this biofuel to apply into our gasoline engines. We're making this transition change. I could see that being more viable. So that's just something in the back of my head when I'm trying to consider the picture as a whole. It's very complex.
Are you guys trying to influence the farm bill? And same question for Tess. Are you guys have ideas for the Congress to try to move things in this direction and give farmers a little more help?
Technically, I'm not allowed to lobby, but right now I had mentioned that we are working on an RCPP grant right now to get monies to our state producers, mainly to look at agroforestry practices, forestry management, and then also installing some of these climate smart practices, and then also to help with water control and mitigation, which also in turn help with the carbon sequestration values. So as I can't lobby, we're formulating grant programs and working with other agencies to try to install some more of these practices and create more initiatives in that way.
Yeah, but you guys comment to federal agencies.
We make comments, but we can't lobby.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay.
Sometimes I wish I could, but
for us on the food shed side, we are working with New Jersey Food Democracy Collaborative. Janine Cava is running that organization, and where the Food Shed Alliance is the fiscal sponsors for them right now. So we are supporting all of her efforts in everything she's doing for the Farm Bill, which is she's taking two sides of it to make farm fresh food more accessible to all people. So making that those types of programs for SNAP and Good Food Bucks and those types of things easier for farmers to engage with, so that they have that financial, again, incentive to be able to engage with those kinds of programs and then get more fresh food to people. And then she's also working on the other side to, make regenerative and organic farming practices the norm. I will say also NOFA New Jersey has a huge policy arm that they are like really running with. Callie Alexander on their board has been really instrumental on getting a lot more supports for organic farms in our state and then just in general as well. So we are, as Food Shed Alliance, kind of staying in our lane and supporting our partners who are doing a lot more than we are able to. But we are, keeping our ear to the ground as far as what is going on with those partners and how we can best support them. So that's all I can really say on that right now, but it's definitely a conversation in the background all the time.
And one of our divisions, and we're also integrated with that, working with Janine Cava as well, with her initiatives, trying to get the website updated. Trying.
Yeah, Janine's amazing. She's the one woman show doing so many different things. I'm so impressed.
And too.
And Senator Booker has legislation to try to change the crop insurance system to make it friendlier for farmers who grow fruits and vegetables and less commodities.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yep, and that's another consideration too. I mean, there with all these different weather events and there's only certain things that are actually insurable. So there's a lot of that as well. Like I don't see pawpaws on the list. And a lot of the alternative crops. But there is more effort to integrate some of that.
Right. And that goes back to what we were saying before, like having those types of crop insurances and those like risk buffers are huge for a farmer to be able to change the way that they're growing and change their system.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Thanks for the great questions, Matt.
Yeah, appreciate that. Oh, we got another one.
Not me. I'm sorry. I thought I lowered it. Give somebody else a chance.
Sure. Yeah. If anyone else has any questions, please feel free to chime in. Rachel, if you could share your presentation with me, I'll make sure everybody gets that too, so they can go through it at their own pace. And if anyone has any follow-up questions, I know your contact information was at the last page of that. And I can of course share that with everyone as well.
And any ag-related questions you have, always feel free to reach out because if I don't know that information, I know how to get to somebody that does. I work a lot with animal health, avian, like we do a whole slew of things. So
yeah, you all have a field day coming up next month too, right?
Yep, our manure link one, our composting field day.
Yeah, awesome. I'm excited about that. And actually a week before that, on July 10th, we are doing a grains field day. So that grains program that I mentioned earlier at Marksboro Mills, we're doing it'll be right around the time that they're harvesting their grain. So we'll be seeing a little bit of their harvest and a little bit of the mill portion of it and talking to farmers who have been growing regenerative grains for a few years now. So that should be a fun event and little plug for anybody who's interested. But thank you so much for your time today, Rachel, and sharing your expertise with us. I'm really excited to be part of that snowball that we were talking about. Thanks again to everybody who came and joined us live and participated. If anyone, again, has any follow-up questions or anything, please feel free to reach out to us. And this recording will be available at foodshedalliance.org/farmer-training, as are all the other recordings as well of our previous workshops. So thanks, everyone. Try to stay cool.
Mhm.